Know what you know and know what you don't know. I don't know farming enough.
A lot of the same.
Okay, great.
Good, how are you?
Can't complain.
I'm pretty involved.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us here tonight for the 9th meeting of the Sanford Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. My name is Erin Moriarty, the city planner, and we have with us tonight a guest from the Maine Farmland Trust, Krista Chappell. Chapel, sorry. Krista Chapel. Should have asked that before. It's essentially her show tonight, but I think it would be helpful if we went around the room and introduce ourselves to her so that she can kind of understand the different departments and entities that are here. And then I can probably introduce the people on Zoom. If you're kind of away from your computer, that's okay as well. But we can start here with Mr. Preventure, please.
Yeah, I'm Matt Preventure. I'm the Assistant City Engineer.
Going this way? Sure. Stephen Buck, City Manager, and as I told you earlier, I'm a reformed commercial potato farmer.
I'm Allison Navi. I'm the Airport Manager.
Alex Hoare, I work for Code Enforcement.
Michelle Labrie, Assistant City Manager.
Jamie Cole, Director of Code Enforcement, Planning and Development.
Lonnie Hoare, Planning Board.
Lee Burnett, fan of Maine Farmland Trust. I'm on the board of Three Rivers Land Trust.
Matt McAdam, McDougall Orchards. I introduced myself earlier. We actually are part of Maine Farmland Trust as well.
Good evening. Andre Brusso, Sanford Sewage District.
Keith McBride from the Sanford Regional Economic Growth Council.
Matt Hill, Sanford Public Works Director and City Engineer.
And I'm Alex Hammerly, Facilities and Emergency Management Director for the city.
Okay, do we want to go around on Zoom? The first on our screen is
Mark Yurgis, a private resident here in Sanford.
I can't tell who's up. Oh, there you go. Ann, you're next.
I'll jump in. Ann Hilson, City Councilor.
I'm assuming I'm next. Michelle Desatel is not only am I owner of Ferment Farm, but I have background in NEPA for the federal government.
Maura Hurley, I'm a Sanford City Councilor.
Bonnie Patterson, a resident of Sanford.
Becky Dixon, resident of Sanford too.
Michael Patterson, resident of Sanford.
If you're speaking, we can't hear on Zoom.
Sorry, technical issues. We're getting the mic straightened out.
I can try to translate through interpretive dance.
I would vote in favor of that.
That sounds fun, but we can hear you now.
No, they're only hearing, I think, at the tables.
Uh-oh.
So if they want to use one of those, maybe move one of those up or have the person sit in front of the, yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
On Zoom? Okay, great.
It's very low though, so if you can get closer to the microphone.
Okay. So I was just saying, it's pretty dense material here. I'll try to work through it as quickly as possible. If you do have a question in the middle of something, I'm, pretty informal, so feel free to just raise your hand, shout out your name or your question, either way. So as Erin said, my name's Krista Chapel. I work in municipal policy for Maine Farmland Trust. So let me just get right to that. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the trust, We're primarily known as a land trust. We can serve agricultural land statewide, but we also do a lot of other have a lot of other broad services. We have a farm network that Matt has mentioned he's a part of, where we offer stewardship for farms that have easements with us, farm business planning to support farm viability, climate resilience work to help steward the land. And also we run, in partnership with the state, a PFAS fund for farms that have had impacts from sludge spreading statewide. And then I work on policy and research at the municipal level, like I mentioned, but we do have individuals who also do advocacy at the federal and state levels. So last year, Maine Farmland Trust embarked on an effort to update our 2011 municipal guide. We worked with Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, town officials, farmers, including Jack McAdam, who is one of our the individuals we consulted on the content, and other partners, organizations, and stakeholders across the state and region who contributed insights and contributions for updating the guide. The full second edition and topic-specific standalone sections, which I provided some of those to Erin, are available on our website, but there are some hard copies I brought this evening also. But if you would like some more, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to provide those. So I'm just going to, like I said, I have a lot of dense topics here, but I'm just going to quickly go over why it's important to support agriculture locally, some planning tools you could use at the municipal level to do that, why it's important to gather information to support those planning initiatives, and then also suggestions for implementation once those planning initiatives have been completed. So you might wonder, other than farms are nice, why it's important to support local agriculture. The benefits of farms and farmland create for our state and communities are diverse and far-reaching. But farmers are also facing a lot of challenges in today's environment and just the climate. And I don't just mean environmental climate, there's this policy climate and other things. Farms offer a lot of economic development. Agriculture serves as an economic development engine for communities and regions in Maine. Most of the purchases by farms are made locally, supporting a large number of secondary local businesses. There's fiscal benefits. 30 years of cost of community services studies show that farmland's net benefit impact on municipal budgets, even when assessed at agricultural values, are positive. Related to this topic is the acute need for more housing, especially affordable housing in Maine. We need more residential development, ideally in line with smart growth principles. But the point to emphasize here is that when it comes to fiscal impact and municipal budgets, which is a top concern for any municipality, farmland should not be seen as not contributing to the local tax base, because as these studies have shown, farmland, even when assessed at agricultural value, can provide a net benefit to municipal budgets. So for every farmlands require a median cost of 37 cents on the dollar for every dollar collected, whereas residential properties generally cost $1.16. Farms also provide environmental and climate benefits. Undeveloped agricultural land and farmers' use of healthy soil practices like cover crops and reduced tillage mitigate the impacts of climate change. They sequester carbon and limit greenhouse gas emissions. And then also importantly, just as important as the economic and environmental benefits of farms, they provide recreational access, they serve as community hubs, they offer culturally relevant and healthy foods to the region. They ensure food security, and they have cultural significance of land stewardship and food production. And also, I'll get into it a little bit later, but the Maine Won't Wait climate plan for the state also includes goals around food production locally that farms help meet. So some challenges that Maine farms are facing, particularly in York County and southern Maine, are the cost of land and low-density development pressures that are breaking up contiguous acres of farmland. Access to farming infrastructure is also a continuing challenge statewide, particularly in the dairy and meat processing sectors. And then also farm succession planning is at a pivotal point for Maine's aging population, and farmers, especially with less interest from the next generation, farmers are facing decisions about what to do with their land and the farms they're running. Luckily, MFT and a lot of other organizations are working to address that with some succession planning tools. So if you know anyone who needs assistance with that, please reach out. So you'll notice, this is just some census data from 2022. You'll notice that both the total number of farms and the total acres being farmed declined significantly between 2012 and 2022. And the vast majority of farm sales are below $25,000 annually. While that means that some farmers are struggling to make ends meet, what it also is showing you is that many farms in Maine are small family farms that offer significant contributions to both the local economy and the sense of community in town. A lot of farmers juggle multiple jobs while also trying to provide food for their communities. So all that brings me to what can your community do to ensure farms continue to be available and to succeed locally? Creating a vision and goals is an excellent first step, and these are some municipal planning tools that you could use to do that. As you all are very familiar with, there's comprehensive planning is a great first step that encompasses a lot of other planning tools that I'll mention in a moment. One thing to note when you're doing some comprehensive plans is that you want to ensure that agriculture is noted throughout the plan. There's, agriculture and forestry chapters that address agriculture specifically, but agriculture can really touch on many of the sections in a comprehensive plan, including the economy, soils, flooding, wildlife habitat, existing and future land use when you're making that map, climate change, and scenic and recreational resources. We know that comp plan committees are a group of really hardworking volunteers, and it's great to see so much staff involved here too in Sanford. And some communities, especially smaller communities, have very limited capacity to do this types of planning. But some committees and communities have really focused on agriculture by implementing community surveys, conducting community surveys that can inform the comp plan. And you can do those either in a kind of really simple format or more enhanced surveys. Comp plans might also include broader policy goals and implementation strategies to identify the need for these surveys and other questions to be addressed and specify steps for how those will be done. And comprehensive plan committees should also consider whether any other recent planning initiatives may have already gathered some information that can inform this. An example would be village master plans and also all the work you've done here to support the infrastructure work here in downtown Sanford. So once you've made a comprehensive plan, implementing it is really, once it's complete, is really, I would say, the hardest part of comprehensive planning. So when you're doing the plan, you really want to consider what implementation might look like and include that as a goal, maybe multiple goals. Some good examples of comprehensive plans that effectively address agriculture, you could look for the towns of Durham, Easton, and Gorham have recent plans that all would address agriculture in a successful way. Some of the goals that impact agriculture effectively in a comprehensive plan, you might want to avoid agricultural soils when defining your growth area. You could task the planning board with evaluating your current ordinances to ensure that they're properly protecting agricultural resources. You could recommend that agriculture be integrated into a community's economic development plan. Like I mentioned, agriculture is has a huge impact on communities' economics. And then you might want to investigate the formation of an agricultural commission. That's something you would probably want to engage farmers around and see if there's interest, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. So comprehensive plans, there's other types of planning initiatives. Open space plans are one. As I mentioned, when you're doing comprehensive planning, you could reference creating an open space plan as one of the goals of your comprehensive plan. Open space plans generally work on conservation of recreational spaces, but it's really important when you're doing them to distinguish working lands from other types of open space and to promote existing working lands conservation as important and also as another type of open space. Some current examples of open space plans that are really effective are in Bar Harbor. And then you could also look up, Scarborough currently has a draft plan that they've been presenting to the council, which really was pretty effective in identifying agriculture in addition to other types of conservation space for recreation. And then I was doing a little research on Sanford, and I noticed that Three Rivers Land Trust has a pretty great comprehensive plan for their organization that accounted for farmland. And they have a map, which I shared with Aaron, which I think is a good baseline. Another type of planning, which you could think about as a goal for your comprehensive plan or as just a totally separate effort, would be climate action plans. Local activities that align with the strategies I've noted here on this slide from the Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan, which is the state level plan, are eligible for no-match community action grants through the state's Community Resilience Partnership. And several of the goals noted here are directly supporting agriculture. So you might think about how your community can engage in this process and identify grant-funded projects to work towards these broad goals locally. Some of the notable goals here that the state has set include doubling permanently protected farmland by 2030 and also having local food be 30% of food consumption in the state by that same date. And then there's other types of planning initiatives you might want to consider too. There's broadband expansion plans, which can certainly support farm businesses in rural areas. Community agriculture plans are excellent plans to think about how food impacts your community. And then there's also local food action plans, which are kind of similar to agriculture plans. So as you're embarking on all these planning initiatives, and there's many of them, you might ask, well, how can we gather information to inform these goals from an agricultural perspective? So you want to make sure that town policies are responsive to the specific and diverse needs of local farmers. You want to build awareness about the amount and variety of local agriculture activity and quantity and quality of farmland in your community. And when you're gathering information, you want to inform farmland protection goals that you're establishing and farmland access opportunities. And then also you might want to establish and grow local capacity. That's generally more important for smaller communities who have very small staffs doing this work. But even if you have the capacity locally, it's important to engage in farmer-driven planning when you're thinking about agriculture. So some of the tools you might use to gather this type of information include community farm surveys. Getting farmers involved in the survey development and outreach process will improve the survey questions and participation. It will ensure respondents are aware of how the information will be used. And you can enlist local and regional agricultural service providers like the UMaine Extension Office, the Soil and Water Conservation District in your area, community food councils, and other food or farming organizations to help get the word out about these types of surveys. Maine Farmland Trust can also partner with you free of charge to help develop these surveys and get the word out in our network also. There may be farmers in your community who are more likely to participate in a survey through personal outreach, so you want to keep that in mind. Due to either technology barriers, language barriers, cultural barriers, or just sometimes there is a general mistrust of government initiatives. So having personal outreach from people on this committee or even an outside organization like Maine Farmland Trust could present an opportunity for farmers to learn more about the survey and how it would support them. Excuse me. You also might want to consider, as I mentioned before, as part of your planning initiatives, taking an inventory of farm and farmland. There, as I mentioned, you could do a simple inventory, which is what I've outlined here. This would include identifying unused agricultural land, that in addition to operating farms, which these properties certainly could play an important role in increasing farmland access for new farmers in the community. And you want to consider small-scale, non-commercial agricultural activities also, like homesteads, and because these operations also play a key role in community food security and the local agricultural economy. So a simple inventory would include things like talking to local community groups about what they know, who they know is farming in town, asking local farmers who else is farming in the area, just driving around, seeing where there's open space that is being underutilized, using tax maps to identify property owners, and like I said, considering people doing kind of homestead activities also. A more extensive inventory is generally something you would do in partnership with a regional planning organization like the Southern Maine Community Development Corporation, or other types of councils of government, or you might enlist University of Maine, or Maine Farmland Trust could also help with that. That way you could utilize GIS resources to really map things effectively. This is where you would take a kind of a more intense inventory by doing an actual farm survey that can inform more details about how land is being used. You could figure out who's also using the current tax use programs, where there's already conserved land, parcels with a minimum acreage of open land that contain particularly high value agricultural soils. And as I said, this would create a more extensive map of the type of farm and farmland that you have in your community. Another way to inform your planning initiatives, which I mentioned earlier, would be to form an agricultural commission. Agricultural commissions are generally made up of farmers in the community who are interested in seeing farm policies that impact in farms in a positive way are implemented in ordinances and land use, and also just the planning initiatives. Generally, the agricultural commissions are at an advisory capacity. They're not a regulatory body, but they would help inform your city council or this committee on interests for the farming community. If there's not enough interest locally in an agricultural commission, because there's just not enough farmers who feel like they want to dedicate time to that, you could consider forming a conservation commission instead that also just incorporates agricultural considerations. The town of North Berwick actually has a great example of that. They have what they call a Conservation Agricultural Commission, and also the town of Cumberland has a Cumberland Lands and Conservation Commission, and they have several subcommittees that inform that work at a more specific level. Some towns that do have actual agricultural commissions, there's actually not a lot in Maine, but they are very valuable, is the City of Auburn, town of Elliott, the town of North Berwick, and the town of Winslow, which was the very first town to adopt an agricultural commission. So you've gone through all the planning. What does that look like for implementation? And there's a lot of different things you can do to impact farms as part of strategy, like policy and ordinance development and zoning. So first I'm going to go over some non-regulatory, farmland protection and tools. The first of which is what Maine Farmland Trust and other land trusts are most known for. It's something called an agricultural conservation easement. Three Rivers Land Trust and Moosomin Way Land Trust, in addition to Maine Farmland Trust, would be and have been excellent partners locally for establishing conservation easements with local landowners. Maine Farmland Trust has 2 private easements here locally. And then I know some other land trusts, I believe, have at least 2 in town also. So what is an agricultural conservation easement? A conservation easement is a voluntary permanent restriction that private landowners opt to place on their property. It prevents subdivision and non-agricultural development while still providing flexibility for current agricultural uses. But it does also compensate the landowner during the easement process if it is purchased by a trust. You can also property owners can also donate an easement that you don't have to purchase it. But it facilitates farmland access by making farmland more affordable, and it also remains in private ownership while also still remaining on the city's tax rolls. Towns can support agricultural conservation easements by helping to identify these properties through surveys, like I mentioned before, collaborating with land trusts. Some municipalities have opted to provide municipal funding to help pay for them instead of relying solely on private property owners to do that outreach. Municipalities have established funds to support conservation easements. And then you also want to make sure, as a municipality, you're considering these properties that have easements, what those restrictions, how they impact property valuations, and they should impact it to some degree. Another type of conservation easements specific to agriculture are called option to purchase at agricultural value. So this was created in response to rising land prices and a growing interest in farm properties from non-farming buyers. Some easements incorporate additional restrictions on the resale of the property to ensure that protected farmland stays in farmer ownership. So essentially, an option to purchase at agricultural value allows the holder of the easement to the opportunity to purchase the property if it is sold, if it comes up for sale and it's not going to be used for an agricultural use. They could opt to buy it so that it could then be resold to a farmer at a more affordable price. Some examples of towns that have gotten really creative on how they might support conservation locally are the towns of Scarborough and Wells. They're using impact fees and development fees, which I'll note in a future slide, that could support this type of conservation fund. And so the city would establish that in addition to potentially, with these funds, in addition to potentially funding it through property taxes or grants. These towns have been supporting the purchase of permanent conservation easements on private property, but municipalities could also consider investing, like I said, in municipal purchases of land with these types of funds. And then once a city or town owns that easement, if you do choose to pursue it from a municipal level, you might think about what you would do with that easement for community use. You could expand your community garden or your farmer's market, or you could get really creative and think about leasing the land that the municipality owns to new or historically underserved farmers that are seeking land access, which is hard to get because land is expensive, to get farms started. I noticed in Sanford you already have a land bank commission, and you could probably build on that by incorporating farm easements or purchases at the municipal level, and they could certainly inform processes that you might establish to do that. So if the municipality, as I said, pursues purchasing land for agricultural purposes, either through, particularly through leasing, it's a great way to welcome and create land access opportunities, like I said, for new farmers. And it is establishing a solid process that serves the interests of the community and has broad outreach with flexible terms is best. The organization Land for Good offers resources if there is an interest in pursuing this as a strategy in your planning efforts. And also the town of Bodenham has done a really extensive farm inventory and is looking into farm leasing. These towns in particular have also pursued leasing opportunities. the town of Lincoln, Massachusetts, which I know is not in Maine, but they've gotten really creative with what they've been doing. And the town of Falmouth, some of you, if you've been up to Falmouth, might have driven by on Route 100, a farm that's owned by the town that they've leased out to Cultivating Community, which provides food locally to food pantries and also schools. And then Cumberland and Winterport have also explored leasing strategies with municipally owned land. So another, those were non-regulatory options. Another thing you can do is think about how your ordinances support farms. Farmland across the state is being lost to all types of development, and being proactive about developing your ordinances that protect agricultural use of the land and limit impact of non-agricultural development on, particularly on important farm soils. Towns can help their community maintain the land base and agricultural resources needed for farmers to sustain and grow their operations now and in the future. There are some general strategies for protecting farmland that towns could consider incorporating into local ordinances, and I've listed some here. The last bullet in particular talks about maximum lot size and density. This is kind of a new framework that communities are exploring. Instead of minimum lot sizes, maximum lot size and maximum lot density in rural zones and agricultural districts is a way to avoid farmland fragmentation. So you're keeping your contiguous spaces contiguous. Grow Smart Maine is an organization that has a lot of information on how to implement maximum lot size. So you might want to explore that, which I can get you that information if that's helpful. I will say that since Sanford has a distinct urban center, minimizing sprawl by focusing your growth where density and infrastructure already exist is key. People often refer to these as smart growth strategies. Springvale and rural spaces outside of the city center will likely still have some development, but you can set standards for that development to encourage contiguous open spaces that recognize currently working lands. I know that you do have conservation subdivisions, and that's another thing you can explore with how to do that, which I'm about to talk about. Some towns choose to limit residential subdivisions outside of the growth area, but if you do intend to allow them, promoting denser development and more housing opportunities close to town is still important. But you could also, in addition to that, choose to adopt subdivision standards for those rural and agricultural areas. Many towns in Maine have adopted open space, or sometimes they're called conservation or cluster subdivision standards. I know that Sanford currently uses this practice and requires a 40% of developed land be conserved as open space, but you might want to think about what it would look like if you ensured that developers were conserving 50 or 60% of the land that they're developing. These types of standards typically provide developers with incentives like density bonuses in exchange for reserving that land as permanent open space. Towns can require that this type of subdivision or incentive is an option over traditional types of subdivisions. And if these standards are to truly, so this is important, if they're truly to benefit working lands as conservation spaces and enhance farming, you want to make sure that the high-value agricultural soils are what is essentially permanently protected in those conservation subdivisions. So that they can have agricultural uses going forward, and that is prioritized in the design standards. Reserved agricultural land in these types of subdivisions can be retained by the developer or the property owners, and still be farmed by them or another farmer. They can be shared by the new residents of the association for growing vegetables or raising livestock, or they could be held by the city of Sanford or a homeowners association. And alternatively, a local land trust. There's a lot of flexibility with who owns the property and what that might look like. I would suggest checking out our municipal guide or contacting me if you're interested in framing that out as a goal in your comprehensive plan. So one of the things you're going to have to do as part of your your comprehensive plan is to define your land use map for Sanford. Once you define that and you adopt the map as part of this planning process, the next step is to think about how you're going to implement that map through your zoning and your land use. And one alternative to creating separate zones that allow agricultural use, or only one agricultural zone in town, is utilizing what's called an agricultural overlay district. And standards like these can be adopted and applied over one or more zones within the city. So essentially you have your basic zone, whether that's rural or rural agricultural or commercial or however you define that. And then you can overlay these standards on top of multiple zones that you identify to basically give more flexibility to people who own the land and are farming it to do the things that they need to do to be successful. This is just some examples of other towns that have had gotten a little bit creative with the types of zoning that they're using. Auburn, in particular, has a dedicated agricultural resource protection zone where they have very strict standards on the type of development that is seen. And I think that's a really good example for Sanford in particular, because Auburn, is a city and they have a lot of density in that city. But then if you go outside a city, if you go outside that city center, there's a lot of rural spaces that are currently being farmed. And those are where the farms are heavily protected. And I think Sanford is a similar situation. You've got Springvale with, a lot of rural spaces with farming activity. Cape Elizabeth has utilized something called, it's a little complicated, but they have something called transfer of development rights, where they identify areas that they want to focus their development. And if developers set aside agricultural purposes in the areas that are not being developed as heavily, they can get density bonuses in those growth areas. The town of Unity has a lot of really interesting strategies that they've developed also. They've directed growth to their downtown district where they have a sewer. And they also allow higher densities with lot sizes as small as 10,000 square feet in that downtown area. They have flexibility with rural lot sizes also, as long as the average density is maintained for the overall development. And they incentivize developers to protect farmland with permanent deed restrictions, and they use setback requirements to protect existing farms, which limit development on active farmland. And then the town of Wilton also has some development standards that they've implemented by using soil types as a measurement. So they determine lot sizes and minimum lot size requirements based on whether or not, or they use a scoring mechanism depending on the type of soils that you'll be developing on. So if you're developing on soils that are really important to agriculture, you're not going to score as well as areas that aren't. A lot of towns actually are considering what solar development, commercial solar development in particular, means for agricultural land. And solar and agriculture can coexist and be mutually beneficial. The key to doing that is avoiding those high value agricultural soils when you're building out commercial solar spaces. Targeting previously developed or disturbed and degraded soils on the farm property in particular. Encouraging dual use, so if you have a commercial solar array, allowing things like sheep to graze underneath it, or figuring out ways for certain types of plants to grow. The name is escaping me, the term, but you can farm certain types of plants that will grow successfully under solar arrays. You also want to make sure you preserve the ability of the land to be farmed in the future. So solar arrays are not permanent. They will go away typically after about 30 years, and you want to make sure that when they're building those out, that the standards for that construction do not disrupt the land to the point where it cannot be farmed in the future. And similarly, you need to minimize impacts of grid connection on that land. And then it's also important to think about the fact that a lot of farmers are trying to diversify their energy needs and also their income. And so solar is an important strategy for a lot of farmers to do that on their land. So totally, some municipalities are just banning solar installations, and that's not always the best strategy to support farmers. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're thinking about conservation easements and how municipalities could support those, you might be thinking, well, where are we going to get the funds to do that? And these are the types of fees you can charge new developments to basically fund conservation in your town. You can accrue these funds locally from development projects and then support the purchase of agricultural land and its uses. So there's things like impact fees, density transfer fees. The towns of Gorham and Topsom have used these pretty successfully. So that was first I went over non-regulatory strategies like conservation easements. Then we talked about ordinances, strategies in particular, and then this is something to consider when you're thinking about how you are phrasing your ordinances and implementing them. So one thing to think about when you're writing ordinances is to make sure that your definitions are flexible and sufficiently accommodating the ability of farmers to diversify their businesses. So you want to make sure you incorporate things like agritourism in a basic definition, because it's really important for farmers to utilize that in today's environment. You want to also think about the types of agricultural structures and uses that farms need, like hoop houses is a type of semi-permanent structure that a lot of farms are using nowadays. They're actually in this picture here, instead of permanent greenhouses. And you want to think about how that is framed out and phrased in your ordinances to be supportive of those types of structures. So like I said, also agritourism, but also like farm worker housing. Labor shortages in the farming community are just as acute as they are everywhere else nowadays. So how can farms support the affordability of housing on their farms for their seasonal workers? There's also types of non-farming kind of ancillary businesses that a lot of farms engage in. So people that make jams or process the food that they're producing into something else, like pickles, so that they can then sell those at a higher rate and get more value back. So you want to think about how they might need to process that on their farm and what you can do in your ordinances, in your definitions to support that. Some towns that have been really creative about their definitions include Cape Elizabeth, in particular, has a really flexible definition, and some of these other towns I've listed here. One of the things you're noticing potentially on this slide is the phrase farm enterprise standards. Farm enterprise ordinances aim to support the economic viability and diversity of agricultural operations by expanding allowable uses on rural lands, which is what I was just kind of indicating. Agritourism, small-scale processing, and that is particularly important with the lack of processing facilities in Maine, which there are a shortage of. I want to just note, I did have a conversation with Jack McAdam, just to kind of, he's worked a lot with the trust over the years, and we wanted to kind of get his sense of what was important here locally. And he mentioned that the town of Newfields, New Hampshire, and the state of New Hampshire itself has a really flexible definition of agriculture, and I looked it up, and it is very extensive, so I recommend taking a look at that. And when you're thinking about how your ordinances are implemented with your code enforcement officer, you want to think about what the application looks like and permitting fees. Eliminating permitting fees and applications for standard farm infrastructure can be really, really impactful for farm viability. So like I said, things like greenhouses and hoop houses and high tunnels and what that looks like. The city of Auburn has reduced its agricultural structure permit fee, and the town of Warren has no fee at all. So this is my last section, I promise. I know this has been a lot. Lastly, you want to think about your the tax programs that are available for farms to reduce the burden of property taxes. So these three programs here are what's referred to as current use tax programs. There's farmland program, open space program, and the tree growth program. These are all state administered programs through the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry that reduce property tax valuations for these types of land uses. Most farms in Maine enroll in the farmland program, but they can also utilize these other two programs. So what this essentially does is property taxes are established under the current use, so the current agricultural use usually, rather than the land's highest and best potential use. So it's a discount on your property taxes based on that current use. Properties that choose to exit the program, though, if they sell their land and they're enrolled in this program, do face a penalty for exiting the program and selling their properties. So they would basically have to pay the municipality back for those discounts over the years. So why am I pointing this out if it's state-run? Well, it's important that towns educate the community about these programs, in particular educating assessors on the implications of these programs and also other types of conservation easements and how those affect valuations is really important. And also just encouraging farmers to enroll in the program, especially if they're feeling the impacts of increased valuations and adjustments to the mill rate. I just want to note, these are some towns that have been really, well, the Department of Agricultural Conservation and Forestry has informative forums regularly on how to implement and also utilize those tax programs. But the towns of Winslow and Monmouth have gotten creative about how they're informing their communities about these programs. The town of Winslow assessor, in particular, has created a brochure that she hands out when she meets with any landowner to inform them of the programs and how they can utilize them. And lastly, I want to point out a very underutilized type of tax relief, property tax relief program that is municipally run. So this is called the Voluntary Municipal Farm Support Program. It's a tool that individual municipalities can adopt to essentially give a credit on farmers' property taxes. But the caveat is that it's different than the current use program in that it's also giving a discount on the farm buildings, not just the land. And then the other thing that farmers have to do if municipalities choose to implement this program is that there is currently a 20-year agricultural easement that they need to place on the land to receive the discount. That we have heard feedback from other communities and farmers that that's a really long time. It's what the statute, state statute dictates, but that's a really long time to have to plan for your easement. So the trust is actually advocating this year on a bill that would lower that to a 10-year easement and provide more flexibility around how it's implemented by towns. Right now, every single easement and property tax reduction has to be approved by the municipal governing body, so like your select board or your city council, which is fairly burdensome. So we are trying to get creative about potentially having it adopted as a strategy at the municipal level, and then giving towns flexibility about how it gets implemented. The city of Auburn is exploring the use of this program as a way to ease how they are implementing new zoning, because they are also potentially undergoing a new comprehensive plan. So they're going to be exploring how to implement this strategy as a way to relieve farms who might find themselves in a zone that is newly zoned in a higher rate through like commercial uses or in a growth area. This would be a way to lower the property tax burden on those farms. And then the town of Winslow and the towns of Monmouth have adopted this program. These are the steps involved in adopting a program. You would basically organize around, see if there's interest from farmers in adopting it, and then you need to set eligibility requirements, which are adopted by your local legislative body. You would develop a model easement, and then also determine the mechanism for how to make those property tax reduction arrangements. And as I said, the town of Winslow has adopted this and has felt like it's been really beneficial for the town. They don't have a lot of farms enrolled right now, I believe, in 2022, which is the last time we've checked in with them about this, but they had 2 farms participating. But it only cost the town 5 cents to give a reduction to these 2 farms in $38,800 in property taxes. So each household was paying 5 cents to relieve property tax for these working farms. So like I said, that's a lot of information. It's a whole book I kind of just went over. So I'm happy to answer questions now, or I'm certainly available if questions come up as you're considering these programs and the planning initiatives going forward. Yep. Yeah.
I'd be interested in how Sanford's Land Bank might contribute. I don't know. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I understand the land bank. I mean, it's pretty high level. I was just looking at it, but I understand it's mostly used for redevelopment of properties that are dilapidated or being underutilized. I think my intent with mentioning it is just that if you have resources in town for purchasing real estate and figuring out how the town does that and the processes involved in it, if you decide to pursue purchases of land for agricultural purposes, they would have some insight into how best to do that in terms of real estate processes and making those types of purchases. Yep.
I've been working with the soil conservation maps for like 20 years, and it never occurred to me to kind of cross-reference those with zoning. So I think that's a really novel idea.
Mm-hmm.
Previously in this series of meetings, I've also been trying to encourage like redevelopment of our urban areas and discourage sprawl. But coming from a public works perspective, where we're trying to maintain the infrastructure we've got and avoid sending our forces to the outskirts of the city in Springvale. So this is, I think, another good reinforcement of encouragement on why to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
I think we have a question online. Michelle?
Thank you very much. And thank you for that presentation. It was very comprehensive and there's a lot of information. So question number 1 is, are you going to share that deck with this group so that we can review some of the things that you mentioned? Because I wasn't taking as copious notes as you're going through.
Yes, absolutely. I can definitely share that with Erin. She can pass it around. Yeah.
That sounds good.
Part 2 is, Erin, when do we apply, like how do we incorporate that into the planning process?
I think now's the time to start talking about that. If we run out of questions, which I don't expect we will, I was thinking we could pull up the zoning map and start to look at where those areas are right now within Sanford, both the current zones of the rural residential and rural mixed use, as well as kind of, we can do an overlap of existing soils, hydrology, wetlands, other things that might kind of overlap with the idea of conserving farmland. And we can start talking about if any of those areas need to change. But it doesn't all have to happen tonight. I would expect everyone is probably going to have to think about it for a little bit. And, we don't have a deadline at the moment. And it's an ongoing process as we continue to work through the comp plan. So.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. This was an excellent presentation, so I appreciate this opportunity to listen in.
How does that maximum lot size work? I never heard of that.
Yeah, to be fair, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. It's really helpful to have a visual, and I wish I had the Grow Smart Maine pamphlet here with me. But essentially, it's a way to conserve in your rural districts. A lot of times, people will set large minimum lot sizes, so you end up having a single-family home on a 5-acre lot, and if you have 10 of those in one spot. You know, if you say you have a 50-acre parcel and you have 10 of those and there's 5 houses, that's 50 acres you've broken up into small little plots that are not useful from an agricultural perspective. So if you're allowing subdivisions in your rural spaces, instead of thinking about a minimum lot size, you might want to think about a maximum lot size where you think about putting all those properties closer to the road so they don't have as much setbacks, and that they have smaller lot sizes so that the space around them is conserved and is more useful. So you would say have a 1 or 2 acre maximum, which would leave a lot more space around those properties for open space, whether that's conservation for recreational purposes or agricultural uses. So it's creating density so that you still have less density around the houses to use.
I can give a few examples of that. So in our R zone and RMU zone, we currently have cluster subdivision provisions, which our minimum lot size, generically speaking, in those zones is 40,000 square feet. If you do a cluster subdivision, you can cut that in half. So it promotes smaller lots for the houses and more open space.
Right.
As she suggested, we currently require 40%. Aaron has started talking with the planning board about almost flopping that, requiring 60%. And allowing 40%. So our ordinance is halfway there already. When those were created 20 years ago, they actually were forward thinking in it. Our current urban zone, which is not necessarily our rural land, but doesn't have a minimum lot size. And that was designed purposely to create urban infill. For example, Main Street, Springvale, next to Jim's Alignment, there was a vacant lot that used to have a gas station that burned down 20 years ago, about a 6,000 square foot lot. Somebody bought it, split it in half, put 2 single families on it. That wouldn't have been allowed up until our urban zone is created, because even our business districts before that required larger lot sizes. So Sanford's ordinance are already trying to get to that, but in the rural zones, I think we can still go a little bit further to require smaller lots for the houses while we're requiring much more open space. Aaron's idea at the planning board was maybe even making a requirement that they have that small hobby farm on the open space. Our ordinance now says you have to have open space. It talks about trails, it talks about land trusts. It doesn't require anything. So in the future, our ordinance should require you to do something beneficial with the open space. Just not say you have to have it, but you have to do something with it.
Yeah, you want to avoid just setting aside wetlands or something people aren't going to use, you know. I mean, our focus is agriculture. We're a farmland trust. But yeah, it's just as important for trail spaces and recreational spaces to have that uninterrupted land that is useful. Yeah.
You mentioned the solar development ordinances. So in some of those, you know, the solar panels are set on the ground with all the infrastructure there.
Yeah.
And you talked about using, you know, crops underneath and stuff. Have any of those, has it been thought about to use existing structures to set those solar panels on so you're not disturbing those soils and using you know, more infrastructure and because I see a lot of places that, you know, can use the existing structures, but is that
Are you talking about specifically on farm properties, or are you talking about commercial arrays on like the top of a mall? Like that kind of
as well.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't addressed that specifically, but in more in more urban spaces that have a built environment, absolutely. If you're utilizing, I mean, that goes along with putting them on areas of degraded soil. Well, I mean, you know, a property with a building on it's not degraded in the same sort of way, but yeah, you're utilizing a space where you're not interrupting those important soils. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll give credit to McDougall's. You have several large buildings. You guys wanted to do some solar, so you put them on your roofs of your barns and stuff. That is great thinking.
Right.
That could become a requirement for projects in those types of zones.
Yeah, I just think about some of like, you know, the big parking lots that we see, you know, Walmart specifically, Lowe's, you know, it would kind of provide, or even those, well, I guess the buildings themselves, you know, they have the large footprint, twofold, you know, and if, you know, if you needed to put them on the ground, maybe raise them up, shade, then you get the solar as well. So that's just something I think about as a farmer, and using the land more efficiently.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's something you might want to consult with the developers who are installing those types of solar projects too. Like I don't know how viable that is for a commercial array, but you know, you've seen them in other states, like urban spaces that have that type of infrastructure. So it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I had a question actually, Krista, about the solar and wondering if the trust or if you've seen any other policy groups have a stance on the practice of kind of like clear cutting trees on a parcel in order to then install solar.
I don't think we've taken a particular stance on that, but I'm sure if I asked my colleagues, it wouldn't be encouraged. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the idea is that you want to site, if you're going to allow commercial solar arrays in town, you want to find spaces that are not either going to be useful in the future or, you know, are being harmful to the environment by, you know, completely clear cutting a working forest. Yeah, I mean, we tend to focus on like open space and agricultural land more than forest spaces, but yeah, I highly doubt we would be advocating.
That's okay. That is helpful.
We've already done it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already happening.
Okay.
Aaron, can you let me comment on that aspect of solar before you move on to the next?
Sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about the deforestation and such under that. So when the large-scale solar project was done at the airport with Nextera, they measured the carbon footprint of the removal of the trees versus the offset that the panels would have over their lifespan. So it was a positive gain on the solar panels by all of the calculations.
Sure.
What do I know as a reformed potato farmer with about 600 acres of working forest still? The average lifespan, as you said, of the solar farms is about 30 years. That's less than one crop cycle of the forested land. So if you cut the trees that are there now, put them to the use at the time they're harvested, you put the solar panels up, they go through their 30-year span. I advocate that there will be better technologies in the future, and that won't necessarily be, so they'll be removed and you go back to the forest and land again. So you haven't destroyed the land, you've simply have changed one crop for another. You've extracted the natural resource of the trees in the first cycle, you put solar panels on there, you extract the solar energy during that period. It's still an extractive resource technology, and then you go back to farming trees again. So it's the thing I like about solar is it's not permanent.
I agree. Yeah.
Once you build houses.
Yeah. Those are more
We'll say it's
permanent.
permanent, so.
Yeah, I mean, these are excellent questions, and I certainly will bring them back to my colleagues to talk about. Yeah.
You know, typically the densities aren't there when you're on structures because they aren't oriented the way where they need to be and such under that. You put solar arrays on any house, be it shingled or a flat roof or anything else, it greatly increases the cost of maintaining that structure from that point forward. So you're better off with using the areas around the farm, the drainage swales, the wetter areas that you can get at seasonally and things of that nature. So. And I will note that in our ordinances, under the conditional use, we did back in 2021, 22, something like that, we did get the prime agricultural soils in there as reference, that when the solar development's going in, they have to at least say why they couldn't have done it someplace else in order to justify that going in there. That was an interesting exercise. So going through that, because this is a lot what we're talking about right now, in that process, a particular farm that had been through a number of cycles. It had been a dairy farm, it had been a Christmas tree farm. So this is indicative of that cycle. It had been all of these things, and the landowner finally had run through all of those options, right? Solar became a new option to produce revenue that was going to preserve the other parts of that farm, right? By having solar in one location, you now have revenue enough to leave the other open space and such under that.
Yep.
That really fought against the preservation on the agricultural soils piece. So economics. So I say this diligently as a reformed farmer. I still have 1,000 acres, and it's still being actively farmed. I just gave up farming it myself about 5 years ago, and it's being rented out now. But it's difficult. If there's not other viable agriculture in that immediate area that could now rent my land, I would have had to have sold it off because the economics would not be there for that scale of land. So.
Right. Well, like I noted, it's important that farmers have that flexibility. So I think, we're not recommending that you say you can't do it at all, but just if you have those parameters in there, the developer has to make the argument about why they need to use those soils. They're at least going through that process of considering other options. So.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Aaron, this is more a question for you, actually, than it is Krista. But Krista's presentation referenced some of the inventory chapters that would go into a comp plan where you would detail, existing open space, kind of like the inventory chapters being a snapshot of what currently exists now. So it's not the forward-looking part of the plan. It's just, here's what we are, here's where we are today, before you launch into the part of a comp plan that says, here's where we want to be 10 years, 20 years in the future. So, because I don't want to lose track of this, I think that it's a good idea when we get to the point of drafting an agricultural inventory chapter to do some of that legwork that her presentation recommended, identifying existing agricultural uses. Obviously, I think that's pretty standard. And then also taking a look at some of the high-value agricultural soils and where those might exist, so that we take that snapshot of the community today, so that when the time comes to talk about maybe implementing some of the other ordinance-based solutions for, we can have that data to look on. So that's really, really long way of asking a relatively simple question, which is, where are we on those inventory chapters? And if we're still a little ways off, then let's not lose track of making sure we want to include that stuff.
A timely question, thank you, Keith. Actually, at a recent council meeting, City Council approved a draft scope of work and a contract with SMPDC, our Regional Planning Commission, who is going to be tackling those inventory chapters for us, because as the Regional Planning Commission, they do a lot of comprehensive planning, and that way they can kind of focus on some of the mapping and inventory, just looking at what's here now, and I can focus or continue to focus on how we're planning for the future and kind of those strategic ordinance changes, since I'm a little bit more in the weeds on our current ordinance than someone coming from outside of the community would be.
Well, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm the chair of the SMPDC's executive committee, but I had no influence on that decision, because this is the first I'm hearing that they even bid on that work. So I'm glad that they're doing it. And I'm actually surprised to hear that. They always didn't tell me for a reason.
That's why we have meetings like this, so I can keep you up to date on everything I'm doing. I think Lee was first.
Question for you.
Okay.
There was a ton of information, ton of tools. How do we go about deciding, given our agricultural footprint, which of these makes the most sense?
Sure. It's a good conversation I think that the group should have, as far as, last meeting we talked about urban infill and how we could promote growth where we have existing or potential to expand municipal facilities. Not all of the examples that Chris is using as far as other municipalities that have strong agricultural policies also have that urban center that we have, or have those municipal facilities that we have.
Yeah.
So I think it would be a good conversation for this group to have as far as, yes, we are attached to the characteristics and the mentality of being an agricultural town, but to what extent do we want to continue to push that kind of endeavor, right? So like, even if we keep the zone boundaries where they are in present day, right now we allow for single-family homes to come in and buy up a farm and put in a subdivision. And that could be fine. In fact, I think the guys from RKG were saying we should reduce our lot sizes in the rural residential zone to allow for more housing out there. And you kind of have to decide, as far as smart growth and sprawl goes, are we looking at Sanford and the boundary of Sanford being we have an urban center and then we have farmland around it? Or are we looking at Sanford as like, Sanford is a service center up until its boundary, and then the farms are outside of Sanford, and the agricultural spread that, you know, the sprawl that we want to limit, that happens outside of Sanford? I don't know how this group feels about that. How strongly do we feel about preserving agricultural land, knowing that we can't do it in the other towns, but also that we are a service center? And so that's one topic, and then we get to the point of how do we enforce that idea?
So can I be a naysayer for the smaller lots?
Sure.
The reason being, who's farmed and been reported to Maine DEP and Department of Agriculture? Oh, my hand's up. So all you do
Smaller
is...
lots, you said you have 1,000 acres.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Go-
I've
continue.
been called in to Board of Pesticide Control and everything else when I used to farm, right?
You're not until you get reported to DEP.
That's
Yeah, that's right. That's how you know you made it.
Yep. You become a point source for phosphorus in the Kenduskeag River and all that stuff. But anyway, so, no, what I'm referencing is when you create that small lot and you put a house there and now you're going to farm all around that, what happens? People, they like the view, but if they see an agricultural sprayer out there, or there's odors, there's flies, all you do is create more enemies, right? And more conflicts. It's that conflicting between the boundaries. You've got a residential property, they like the viewscape, that's why they bought the piece of land there, they put all their money into it, and then, you go by it, 5 o'clock in the morning, the tractor going, right? What's this? I don't like this. I'm going to call and complain about that.
Yeah, I didn't get into all the weeds.
Yeah.
But that's where you could get into things like requiring buffers and setbacks from any type of development that does happen near a farm. And also utilizing that agricultural overlay district could address some of those concerns, because you can apply those standards and the rights of farms to be farming in the zones that you designate with, you're not just saying agriculture can only exist here in this one zone. Maybe it exists in multiple zones, but then you have standards that support that.
Yeah, so do you know how ineffective that is when you say to your newly neighbor that moved from a certain particular state, whose 2 letters are MA, you say, there's the Maine Agricultural Protection Act, I have the right to farm.
You do.
They don't care.
I know.
Right? I've fought that battle many times.
I understand. I know that's difficult, but farms do have, like you said, they have a right to farm. So, yeah, having standards in place that support the farms can make that clear to the people that try to build around it.
So I think the top of my list is what is the definition of a farm? What are we talking about, right? Because when you say farm to me, I think commercial, because I did say that. I'm a reformed commercial producer. So reading through your the information that you sent, which was really great information, and I do note that if you just skip to page 141, where you have the appendices of all of the strategies located in the last 3 pages, it's very helpful. But so I pulled out of this. So in the 22 census, and you referenced some numbers here today, it said 75% of farms have less than $25,000 in sales in 2022, right? 61% have less than $10,000.
That's right. Yeah.
Right, and 63% had a net loss in 2022. Yeah, that sounds familiar. So, so what is a farm? You know, I think hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres and large-scale equipment and stuff like that. We don't have any of that here in our community. We have, you have a good-sized operation, right?
Yeah, we only have about maybe 14 acres that's actual working farmland. The rest of it is in a tree growth protection program. So, you know, it's definitely not, it's not acres and acres and acres for sure.
So I think we really have to drill down on what we're going to define as being a farm when we're thinking about preservation and such and that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's changing every day too, because people are getting, you know, as technology progresses and people are finding ways to farm on smaller plots and get more yield out of them. I mean, that is people are having successful CSAs on some pretty small plots nowadays. But also, Westbrook just built a vertical farm inside a building. So is that a farm? I mean, it's a question. I don't have an answer.
We
you know, but
have that too.
yeah. So like, yeah. I mean, you can.
We have a lot of marijuana
product.
Well, yeah,
growing
right.
in,
It is a
in
type
our
of
mills.
crop.
Yeah, it's a crop. It's a crop.
So when we think about, you know, soil, scale, location, all of that
Yeah.
aspect, we'll have to weave into our definition of farm, what a farm is.
I'm going to go to Michelle first, actually. Thanks, guys. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So as one of the very few registered farms with the state of Maine, of which 5 acres is the definition for 5 contiguous acres to be a farm, and I think we should stick with that if we're going to be finding it. And having been a recipient of the state of Massachusetts ire, lots of conversations on my neighbor, but we took care of ourselves, so we didn't complain. I am curious, Aaron, you mentioned this group has the conversation about what we would want to do, but at what point does the public, the other residents, the people who work here, have an opportunity to weigh in on what this group recommends?
And other farmers, I would say, as well.
I was going to point that out.
Yeah, or other farmers, because they're not here at the table. Yes, thank you.
Yep, it's a great question. We are launching public engagement, but if we could do a more targeted approach, like Krista recommended, kind of going out and talking specifically to active farmers. That's not going to hit everyone that's not currently farming, but you know, we do have an active farmers market. That would be a location where I would expect to try to get feedback about any topic, but then also specifically it would be a great place to talk about farms and what people would like to see in the future.
Okay, and I appreciate the mention in your presentation about homesteads, because we do have at least one, maybe more, that are active in using the land very similar to what a farm does. Thank you.
Sure. I forget, Matt, you had your hand up?
So this is all great discussion. I think similar to some of the comments on the market analysis, we need to consider what branding is going on for Sanford for farming. In your presentation, you know, you had some communities that I associate with, like a lot of farms in Maine. I think about Unity, I think about Farm, Rural Living, Common Ground Fair. You know, how close does that get, you know, Sanford to people associating that? So, you know, what's our brand? Service center, farming, trails. We've got an urban core, we've got a rural side, and we need to kind of promote that. You know, it's got to be part. We need to decide like what that brand needs to be in order to succeed, and then like clearly define what our wants and needs are through the market analysis and through the comprehensive plan. And my only other point is that, you know, whatever that is, we need to effectively like communicate that in the comp plan, but then also, I think really try to tie it into the GIS really hard. That's something that I really harp on, is that I really like our GIS system. It's got a lot of good information, and the more good information we put into it, the better tool it becomes. So the more we can evolve that, the more we can get everybody kind of like on the same page, because I feel like even with some of the changes that were difficult lately, it's still like a really excellent tool. And I got a comment the other day from somebody outside the office, like, "Oh, you're going to Sanford GIS before you go to Google Map." I'm like, "Oh yeah, wait till you see like all the data here. Like it's way more intense." So
I've used it a few times, and I agree, it's a great tool.
yeah, so let's take everything that we've got in this, and then like don't forget to budget some money to get it into the GIS.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had never actually heard of an agricultural overlay before. Like, obviously, I'd heard of it for development and commercial businesses and
Watersheds, yeah.
exactly, but not for agricultural, and that is interesting. And I also was wondering about the different programs, the farmland, open space, and tree growth programs. Is that something that's mappable? Like, you have an area, right? And
We have it. We have areas that are in tree growth and are in active farmland. I have a GIS program that I use, and I have mapped our entire farm with, everything that we grow, and I don't know if I've split it from tree growth into an active farmland, but it's pretty easy to see.
okay,
But I have all the boundary lines, all of that in.
yeah,
And it's a useful tool, especially when working with different groups, Maine Farmland Trust, obviously, because we know where our easements are, because we actually have two easements, one through Maine Farmland Trust. We also have one through Mousom Way Land Trust, and those are on two different sides of the road. The old town farm property is Mousom Way Land Trust, and that's a little bit more in tree growth than some of the rest of our property, which is has more of our agricultural use on it.
Can you think of any pros or cons to having that kind of data being publicly available on the Sanford's GIS? Like, would it make sense for your neighbor to know where you're in tree growth versus not?
I believe that is all public data. Yeah, it's the state.
A lot of that is, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, probably some of the stuff that I have mapped out is not useful to my neighbor, but the lands in the tree growth, my boundaries, all of that, and that my property has an easement. Both pieces of my property have easements on them, because there are restrictions, and there are some irregularities in it's not just straight property lines, they're all over the place. So that makes things easier, I think, as Maine Farmland Trust. They actually walk our property boundaries.
Yearly.
And make sure that we're complying with the easement.
And the GIS access to it is customizable too. So if you're not supposed to be looking at his trees,
True,
he could have it on layers where only certain groups get to look at it.
it's true. Lee?
Yeah, I think it would be really helpful if we did map the lands in Sanford that are in current use, because that will tell you who the landowners are in Sanford that are already predisposed to conservation, because they're already pledging to keep their land out of development. And it's just really helpful to know who they are. And it's all public information.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. I have a meeting set up with SMPDC to kind of refine that scope of work more, so I can add some things in there as far as kind of some more nuances to the inventory and analysis chapters. I think that would be great.
So I'm hoping that we come to a common conclusion. So I'm trying to get to the ancillary value of the farms. It's not just the crop that comes off the farm, right?
Right.
It's the viewscape. It's as Matt was discussing, it's a sense of pride in the community. We've got this open space. We've got trails activity. When you do the farm tour every spring and whatnot, it's a calling card. It brings people into our community. I mean, I view you as an agritourism business because
We are.
It was my grandson's first opportunity to pick apples, was coming up to your place, right? Yeah. Love the donuts, too, so.
Oh, yes.
But, you know, in trying to recognize, you know, I really like a bit into the agritourism ordinance, right? Developing standards around that. So last Sunday was Maple Sugar Sunday, so we went to Newfield, to Hilltop Boilers.
Yep.
They don't have a safety plan, oh my God, right? Holy cow.
In regards to that, I'd suggest taking a look at Gorham. They've done a lot of work on supporting agritourism in their community lately. Yeah.
Right, because I know we've had difficulty with parking and traffic counts and all that stuff. So to be able to sort of set some of those concerns aside by having a well-crafted ordinance would be valuable for us in the future. Because I see a lot of the scale of a lot of the farms here in our community, they're of that scale, and it's as much about selling the experience as anything. So, you know, I'll go back into the early 80s when I was marketing to Fred Rainville had a farm outside of Massachusetts, and he would come up with a trailer truck to get his potato seed from me every year. And the first year I took over the marketing from my grandfather, I'm trying to convince him all these new numbered varieties that we had, FL 657, and all these experimental varieties. Fred, this is what you need to buy. This is what you need to buy. No, I want my usual. And he got a little obstinate. He said, what do I typically buy off you? I said, well, Katahdin's, Kennebec, Siberia's, Norwest, New Orleans. He says, why do I buy those from you? Well, you're going to tell me, aren't you? It's the name. It's the name that I want on the sign because I'm selling the experience. When people come to the farm, he said, 40% of whatever I grow is trampled right into the ground. But I sell the experience. He was a very wealthy man because he sold the experience. So, yeah.
Erin, can I add one more thing?
Sure.
So kind of, not all the farms in our area sell the experience. We are not one that sell the experience, but we do focus on value-added products. And I think that should be something considered when you're thinking about what is a farm, what are they doing, and the homesteads. Because I think it's important to the economic activity of the city that we're bringing. Not only are we selling fresh food, but we're also value-added foods, which is increasing the economic value to the city. So I just wanted to point it out that it's not just about the experience. There's more to the farming aspect, and I appreciate that she had that in her presentation. I don't know if that's something that the city this group wants to consider as we move forward with some of the recommendations.
I'll echo that too. I see a lot of that for Michelle. There are a lot of places that do value-added products and are not just, don't just have the agritourism, don't have the experience, but they are very valuable.
On the off chance that someone in this group doesn't know what a value-added product is, do you want to give a brief description?
Michelle, do you want to take that one or should I?
I appreciate that, Matt. So basically, either you grow or you buy, you resource a product, and then you're doing something to it, whether you're making jam, I make apple cider caramels, I also make ice cream. So you're taking a product, whether you're growing or supplying it from a local farm, and then building another product and selling it from your establishment or the local area. Even cider is a value-added product. It takes the apple and makes the juice. Yeah. So I hope that
honey or maple syrup would be included in that as well.
As well. Yep.
Yeah. For instance, you can buy a pound of
mushrooms.
carrots. You can buy a pound of carrots for $6, but if you buy a jar of pickled carrots, it's $10.
Got it. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Where are you getting it? It's $12 now.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
And Matt, would you agree that apple cider donuts are a value-added product?
Oh yes.
I forgot she was here.
Very value-added product, I think most people would say.
I think that's a must-have product.
Yeah.
What do we have to do to get crop dusting aircraft? Because those are so cool.
We used to have those at the orchard. We used to have that. That actually was done.
Yep. Is that still
And I've been
done
told
in
that
Maine?
Yeah.
Man, those guys are cowboys.
Go to Ashland and look at the Graham boys up there. They have their own plane.
Well, if that's part of the branding, it'd be really cool. That kind of aeronautical use.
Yeah, I do think the city of Auburn would be a really good example for Sanford. And I'm happy to introduce you to people who are working on this actively. They have a pretty diverse group of people. There's some farmers on their agricultural working committee that's done a lot of work to support agriculture while also recognizing that Auburn is a city. And they've also recently developed a local foods action plan that they're implementing. So.
Has the Maine Farmland Trust come out with any statements about the state legislators' current in the last number of years, their unilateral imposition of doubling the densities and such into that one-size-shoe-fits-all zoning to encourage residential housing throughout the state, that some of those recently implemented standards are detrimental to preservation of farmland?
Yeah. I mean, every legislative session, we take a look at what's being proposed and have a conversation internally. And we also have an advocacy committee made up entirely of farmers that are statewide representatives that we kind of bounce ideas off of and seeing what they feel is important to advocate around. There is a lot of work right now amending the bill. There's a couple bills that are attempting to amend the growth management law, which dictates the comprehensive planning efforts. There's a bill right now that is looking to establish a committee to study subdivision rules and the statute that supports that. Maine Farmland Trust has been working with the advocacy groups that have been kind of behind some of those efforts. We don't always agree with exactly everything they're doing, but when we see something that's directly relevant to agriculture, like the subdivision review, we definitely have been advocating in the support of that. The committee that they're looking to form wouldn't come up with a law that is binding right now. It's basically to study it and then come out with recommendations. So, yeah.
So can we talk about the currently available tax programs in the state of Maine? So I put all of our farms into back then farm and open space in the early 80s, and then they split the tree used to be the tillable and the adjoining woodland had automatic designation for tree growth, and then they now you get a separate tree growth timber harvesting management plan on the timber and such into that. So there's a cost to getting in and maintaining those programs that sometimes the tax savings don't fully offset that. So for me, I've got 600 acres of forest land that I actively manage and we selectively cut and such into that. And it's about 10 grand every 10 years to redo my growth management plan with a registered forester. So
yeah, I mean, certainly not every farm, it's not a fit for every farm, and there are many that choose not to participate in these tax relief programs. I mean, if you're seeing a savings of, a couple $100s on your property tax bill, is it worth your time and energy to be doing this, enrolling in these programs and potentially having a penalty if you decide to opt out later? But people with, insignificant investments in the land, and then also in communities that are seeing really large valuation increases and impacts to their property taxes. And if you happen to find your farm or your property in an area, in a growth area where, the land values are being taxed at their, possible uses in the future rather than what they're currently using. So, there's value in that, but you have to make that determination. Each farmer has to make that determination whether it's a value add for them.
You got a Zoom question.
Yeah, Michael, please.
Hey, guys. Thank you. So I thought it was interesting, Matt's comment earlier about, hey, how do we want to market ourselves as a community? Maybe I misinterpreted that, Matt, but I was just like, yeah, I'm like, where are we going with this city? And we made a decision back in 2013, I think it was, that we were a city and that we were going to me, that said we were going to become more urban and less rural. And, I love our farms. I've created several videos on YouTube about our different farms, Rivards, Levines, McDougall's, and Flowers, even in some of the neighboring towns like North Berwick. I've done videos. I love our farms. But, you know, is it where this town is going? I don't think so. I think our farms are outdoor recreation and entertainment. If, you know, Christmas tree farms and like that. And when I think of farming at some levels, I think it's an industry. You know, like when I meet people that say they're from out west and they've got 800 acres or 1,000 acres or something like that's an industry. What we have locally around here is things that are fun. You know, we have these little farms, you know, that have, you know, maybe 100 acres. And, you know, we go there, pick apples, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. But I don't think it adds tremendous economic value to the immediate community. I think it's an outdoor recreational activity, and I love it, and I want it to continue. But I don't think it brings a lot of economic value.
Yeah, we haven't quite broached the topic of outdoor recreation yet. I did go to a conference in the fall that was talking about actually that outdoor recreation is one of Maine's largest and fastest growing industries. So even if we're looking at farmland in particular, I think the confluence of agricultural land with conserved land, which then leads to the potential for trails and outdoor recreation, is a steady and growing economic market. And hoping to talk to this group about all of those things at an upcoming meeting, but I don't have like the figures in front of me right now. I can send you another report if you want to read that. I've got plenty of those. And it might actually already be in the Google Drive if you want to hunt for it for outdoor recreation. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, Michael, and I think that there's a case to be made, but we just haven't had that conversation yet. Anne.
Well, and I just wanted to share the perspective that being connected to local farmers from a business and personal standpoint, I would say that they would feel strongly that there is economic impact, both with the staffing level that they have, even if seasonally, as well as the volume of people that are coming into town to partake in their, farming goods, whether off the tree or value added at both our farmers markets, which are really highly attended, as well as their sites or their street, even street kind of booths, if you will. But so I would argue there actually is an economic impact, and it's not necessarily insignificant compared to other small businesses in our community. That's all.
Yeah, that's great. I actually had a question, Krista. You mentioned, I think it's Falmouth was looking at acquiring land for town-owned farms. And I was wondering if Maine has any examples of like a university-owned farm. So it's very common in the Midwest that large-scale state universities also have an agricultural program. And that even though those schools are generally located in urban centers, they have like a satellite campus that's on farmland and agriculturally education-based, and I wasn't sure if we had that in Maine.
I believe we do, or at least we do at a small scale. I'd have to look into it a little more and get back to you. I do know that there is a large prison that has an operational farm also, and I forget exactly where that is. I think it's in the Mid-Coast, but...
I believe Unity used to. I think it's closed now.
True.
Aaron, so University of Maine does own Highmore Farm, which is a research farm.
Yeah.
Okay. It's actually in Monmouth, which is one of the communities that Krista was talking about. And I believe they also have a research farm I think it's in Old Town for dairy.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if there's universities that are looking to acquire more land and looking to expand those programs. Like, is the educational portion of agriculture, is that growing?
I would say so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, pending funding, it's probably.
Well, yeah, sure. Pending, whatever.
Yeah.
In 4 years, is it growing?
Yeah.
Great. Question? Someone else had their hand up.
So I'll note that in 2022, the city took on its current logo. And one of the prime features in that logo is a rolling hill with a farmhouse, a barn on it with 2 silos. So that was, recognition that agriculture, for the scale that we have, is an important feature within our community. So There's an expression of the rural residential, the historic mills, the downtown density, the water, and then the trees, and all of that is in there. But agriculture is one of those prime features in the city's logo.
Because she didn't have her mic on. Allison is asking how chicken and animal ordinances play into the topic.
Can I grab that one?
Yeah, you can. I just wanted to say it so
Oh.
people on Zoom could hear.
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
I got to be crabby about something, so we're not talking about parking tonight. So I think the residential chicken ordinance is probably the worst thing that our city ever did. I advised against it at the time. I still advise against it. When you look at animal husbandry practices and why it was zoned out of the urban core way back when because of the health issues, and then everything goes in a cycle, it's cyclical, right? Oh, we forgot why we did that. So but let's go back and do it to ourselves again, and so that we can then bring it back around and zone it back out. It's not the 5 chickens, it's the abuse of the people that have to have 100 chickens on the similar size lot. So it's always the extremities that take place there. We've had issues with a cow being chained up on the front lawn and the urban core and everything else. So I think there needs to be a distinct separation when it comes to animal husbandry and what our ordinances reflect. And again, it's a conflict of use, right? When our public health officers, who's now our fire chiefs, run around and deal with rats because of rat infestations, because of the chickens being poorly managed in our urban core, there's an issue with that. And that's why it was zoned out at one point in time.
Thanks, Steve. We can talk about chickens as we evolve our farm ordinances for sure.
They don't need parking.
They don't need parking, so they can move right in. Lenny, did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say, I think having farmland makes Sanford more valuable. To be able to have both the urban and the rural landscape, to be able to take a short drive. You know, if you're living on Main Street in an apartment, you can drive maybe 1 or 2 miles to a farm, and you don't have to drive up to Unity or, you know, up to Newfield. I think that makes Sanford more valuable, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a quality of life factor in addition to the economic challenges of running a farm and whether or not a farm is profitable. It still adds value to everyone, both on the farm and in the vicinity. I agree.
That makes me think of like those Outward Bound programs where they would take kids in the inner city and take them out into the wilderness, and then, but also the kids from the farmlands and like, oh, come on into the urban city and have an urban outpost.
Use a crosswalk.
Yeah, I've seen it happen.
That's great. Okay, we're coming up on 7:45. So does anyone on Zoom have any more questions? Okay, great. I'm not exactly sure what we'll be talking about at the next meeting. Sorry. Okay. I think we'll probably build on the duality of the urban and the rural as we continue to work on some of those options. But then, like I mentioned, I would like to talk about outdoor recreation, so that might be at the next meeting as well. Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you again to Krista, everybody. That was a great.
Thank you very much for having me. And I just want to say, I can come back. Like, this doesn't have to be the last time I'm here. I'm happy to engage with you on some survey data, or if you're speaking with I always get the acronym wrong.
SMPDC.
SMPDC. I can sit in with those conversations too. So happy to be a resource, and thank you for letting me bore you with a lot of dense conversation.
I love it. I said to Krista, you got to know what you know and know what you don't know. Yeah. That's why I brought in the experts to talk about farming. So.